As a CXO or as a leader or as an entrepreneur, how many times have you had this little voice in the head tell you that you are not good enough, you're not smart enough, you're not sharp enough, you're not charismatic enough, and basically, you are never enough? And you know what? You're not the only one. In this episode of CXO Talks, I speak with Dr. Neeta Bhushan, a world renowned emotional health advocate and also a very known expert on the themes of grit and resilience. For someone who was orphaned at a very young age, lost her brother, survived an abusive marriage, and many other adversities, Dr. Neeta Bhushan also went on to build a multi-million-dollar cosmetic dentistry practice, which she then sold off and went on to contribute a powerful message on grit and resilience from her life learnings and leadership journey on global stages. In our conversation today, she talks about how CXOs and high-achieving entrepreneurs deal with imposter syndrome, how they wear a chip on their shoulder or bury the overwhelmed, terrible, awful moments and the discomfort, instead of digging deep and asking themselves, what is this really telling me? And a lot more. Hope you don't miss the very profound activity that Dr. Neeta takes us through in this conversation. And do not forget to pre-order her new book, That Sucked, Now What? Now, let's hear what this CXO talks. Hey Neeta, I am super excited to have you on CXO Talks today, and seeing you after like 2018 now just feels so good. And I know the audience that it's so, I cannot tell you how overwhelmed I am right now to see you. And there was a time when we were at Mind Valley, Estonia, and to now, I think it's been post-pandemic. So much has happened, and so much has happened in your life. How have you been?
Wow, yes. Oh my gosh. I feel like I've birthed three babies. I've birthed two actual babies since 2018. And the third baby is just about to birth. So it's been a full, season of life, that's for sure. And I think, entering the stage of motherhood, and I know a lot of the listeners listening have had their own babies in terms of businesses and their passion projects and things that perhaps maybe have birthed out from the pandemic. But I feel like it's totally shifted the way that, at least for me, I would like to connect, because I even started, podcast, The Brave Table, to really talk about some of the brave conversations that we're not necessarily comfortable having. And I think that, yeah, it sparked this new era of me even talking about sucky moments. And I mean, my next book is coming out in a couple of months, and it's called That Sucked, Now What? And so it's a beautiful, I think, time that people are just really needing and wanting permission to have that vulnerability, to really talk about some of the challenges, whether it's, personal, because personal stuff always kind of finds its way into business happenings, whether you're in a startup, whether you have big dreams. But if we don't have our, personal situations focused on and handled, then it's going to spill over into a lot of the things that we're actually wanting to do in our the best version of ourselves. So I'm very excited to be here.
And so am I. And the fact that you're just birthing your third baby that's going to just come out anytime in January, I just can't wait to get my hands onto it. Um, Neeta, you talked about the sucky, shitty moments, right? And the title of your book is That Sucked, Now What? Take me to that time when you had those sucky moments, when life wasn't the best, and to now where you are. What really conspired to get you where you are right now, and what was that journey like?
Yeah, so wow, I've had many sucky moments. I think that growing up as a child caretaker at 10 years old, my parents were immigrants. My dad was from, Delhi. My mom was from the Philippines. And so they met in the US. I was the oldest of three kids. And they wanted that your quintessential American dream. And so they worked their tails off. They worked really hard. And my mom got super sick when I was 10, and that would literally change the trajectory of my life. And so at 10 years old, as the eldest daughter, I'm taking care of my mom. She battled her breast cancer for about 6 years in and out of hospitals. So between 10 and 16, I'm growing up. I mean, it was no, and we, you kind of know that something is not right. You have the pinnings in your stomach, the knots in your stomach. And then she passed when I was 16. And then I would get into tragedies over the next 5 years. Then I would lose my brother a year later to a sudden asthma attack. And then 2 years later, I'd lose my dad. So at 19, I am now the caretaker of my youngest brother, who's 14 at the time. And there was a lot of there was a lot of pain, a lot of turmoil, a lot of, just suffering, and we were just in survival mode. I think one of the lessons my parents left me was that, don't let anybody feel bad for you, and success and accolades and, just high achievement. That became my mantra, and that became literally my coping mechanism. So, and I think, a lot of what I talk about in this book as well was back then I didn't have the tools. A lot of us growing up, in this side of the world, we don't have the tools to really cope with severe, loss and death, and talking about some of these sucky moments. And so for a whole decade, I would then bury all of those feelings. I would stick them in the back of a closet. And I'm like, okay, because people told me, you're strong, Neeta. Even though you lost your parents and brother, you're so strong. Be strong, big girls don't cry. So yeah, I sucked it up. And uh, and then it came, catching up to me a decade later when I found myself in a very abusive and tumultuous marriage. I wanted the dream. I wanted to recreate a family that I had lost. And so I was outwardly very successful. I had a dental practice before I was 30. I, was living this dream. I had this amazing home. I had, the fancy cars, this whole life that I thought I'd rebuild after losing and going through such tremendous loss, all to just, arrive at December 31st, 2011. And I was looking in the mirror thinking, well, how in the world did I get here? Like, I was so distraught. I was living in fear, fear of what would, lo kya kenge, what would the people around me think? What would my family think that I'm stuck in this, abusive situation and this relationship, and I wasn't truthful. And so I felt like I was living a lie, because on the outside it was one thing, but on the inside I was spiritually dead. I felt like I didn't know myself. And so in that time period, that moment was when I recognized I was in, and it's one of the concepts that I talk about in the book. It's one of the frameworks I talk about called the Fly Forward framework. The first stage is recognizing you have a fall. This was my fall. This was that quintessential rock bottom moment where I'm like, okay, things are so bad that I have to make a decision. And now for listeners, things could be so bad in your business that you may think that you have to let somebody go, or you may think you have to tell that partner, I don't want to be partners with you anymore. But something is happening where you're like, I have to make a decision. And so for me, that decision was, I'm leaving this relationship. I don't know what's going to happen. I have no idea, but I need to be truthful with myself. And I think that then began the journey for, the next 5 years of deep healing. And really, I talk about resiliency in this book. And yes, I'm an expert on grit and resilience. My first book was all about grit. But, in that first book, it was really talking about that toughness because I needed to have those coping mechanisms to get through a very tough time in life, and thank God it was overworking and busyness and distraction. It still led me to burnout, but yet the true breakdown, because glass, when you drop it, breaks. It's tough, right? It's tough, it's strong, yet you drop it, it breaks. If you take a right, and you take a basketball, you drop it, it bounces. It bounces because resiliency comes from the Latin word resiliere, which means to bounce. Because there is that flexibility, there is that agility, there is that softness. It's not always the brittleness, the toughness, because we're so tough we break. And I tell you, I broke down. I finally let the tears out. I was wailing, I was crying, I was feeling for the first time in a decade, and grieving all of the losses, including this loss of this ideal marriage, picture perfect life that I thought I was going to live happily ever after. and and I had to recreate everything. And so me breaking down into a million pieces and allowing people to see me even as growing this $1 million practice, but broken, and crying for the first time, and allowing my team members to see, like, I'm fucking human, and this this is what happens, and that's really what then spearheaded, me working with coaches, executive coaches, consultants, shamans, healers, you know different modalities of healing, even, to then allow me to feel the feels and allow me to then integrate. What I talk about in the book is, the 5 stages. And so when you have a fall, the second stage is that ignite. Stage 2 is the ignite. It's the spark, it's the underbelly, it's the, are you going to stay in this job, or are you going to start your own thing? Are you going to fire that person that's been stealing from you, or are you going to shove it under a rug? Are you going to stand up to your parents who don't really accept who you're with, or don't really accept the trajectory of your life? Or are you going to shove it under a rug? And so that's the spark, the ignition, stage 2, before you then make a monumental shift. And we get into stage 3. And stage 3, I think, for a lot of us, is we're rising. Stage 3 for a lot of us is, okay, this is this new chapter. You're in the startup world, you're looking for investment, you're looking for more amazing team players to be on this mission with you, and you're embracing this newness, this new chapter in your life. And yeah, you're still having these complex emotions. You're still kind of reserved, yet you're curious, and then we get into stage 4 and 5. And that's stage 4 is your magnifying stage. Stage 4 is, okay, you're accepting where you are. You're blossoming, you're growing exponentially. Maybe, you're getting ready to date again, or you're now so convicted in what you believe in that your thing, whatever it is going to change so many lives. It's no longer about you anymore. It's about it's about the impact that you create. And that's where we get into stage 5, which is thriving. Now, it doesn't mean that you can be thriving in the business sense. You can be having a fall in your personal life. You can be having a fall that's not integrated, not speaking to your parents, not speaking to you know, your the closest people around you, your partner, having such a difficult time. Again, that's going to slowly trickle into that thriving stage of your business. And so this is where we start to look at the individual aspects of our, I love when people say, oh yeah, but whatever is going on in my personal life doesn't affect my business life. I mean, we're in the business now in this day and age where everything you do on social media, personal, public, whatever, it all blends in. This is the multi-dimensional aspects of us. We're not in our parents' generation anymore where it's like, oh, I'm this way in this vertical, I'm this way in this vertical. And I make fun of that because I used to be that way. I used to think like I can't bring all of my quirks to the table. I won't be taken seriously. But I'm like, hey, I love fashion. I love hats. This is how I'm showing up. And yes, I have a story as well. And I'm so passionate about emotional health and mental health because I think that, if we haven't learned anything in the last few years, I know so many of us and so many of, my extended family who was stuck in India, friends, business partners who, they had to do an inner reckoning with themselves. You had to go inward. And if not, you were breaking down. You were that glass that was shattering. And hopefully you were able to build yourself up in a different way to allow for more vulnerability. And that's that stage of thriving that I talk about in the book is it doesn't mean you're less immune to falling again. You will fall. You will have many falls, but now you're more integrated because you now understand the different aspects of your life and you're not ashamed. And that's the other thing that we carry around a lot in the diaspora, is the shame that we have these secrets to hide. And it's like, bring it out on the table. I mean, let's talk about the insecurities that we have. Let's talk about the things that are holding us back in some way so that we can be better, so that we can have a more collaborative discussion on, hey, you have these strengths, I have these strengths, let's come together. And so what if we have a that suck now what moment? Yeah, it's owning your story and owning the parts of it that make you human, yet make you so unique to your industry or whatever you are trying to do in the world. I think, there's not going to be someone like you, Sonia, or someone like me. Hopefully not. They're going to add their own flair to whatever they're doing. And that's beautiful.
Yeah. And that's what makes the whole together come together, right? But Neeta, I love the way you put across this framework that you've put into this book. And, as I think about it, while you owned your own story and you went through that inner journey and it healed you, it helped you heal many other lives, of course. What I got reminded of is, when you were talking about the fire, the underbelly, right? That the time when you see that spark, that ignition happening. It also reminded me how it is chaos that actually gives rise to those bright dancing stars. And
It's true.
in that process, what if I take a step back, you also talked about how we create this toughness as a facade, how we try to live with this mask that we are strong, we'll handle it all. We try to not, we resist actually acknowledging the fact that we're falling and we're breaking. And that's something that I see a lot in leadership. That's something that I see a lot in the CXO journey and in entrepreneurs because it's not an easy journey. It's tough, it's lonely, and we continue to live behind that facade. And while you work with these CXOs, you are a coach now, and you've had this journey. What do you see is often coming to the surface when you work with these CXOs and leaders and entrepreneurs? Why is it that they continue to resist, recognizing and acknowledging that time when they're breaking, when they're falling?
Yeah, I think it's just the whole subculture, and the subculture that exists is, oh, I've got to, I've got to stay strong. I've got to keep going. I've got to keep moving. There's this lack mentality. And I talk a lot about it in the book, the idea behind, we have three fear cultures that we operate with many times. And the first fear culture is, there is not enough. And that's the lack mentality. There is not enough. The fear culture of aversion, where I'm not enough. So I'm going to keep doing, and keep doing. And there is not enough. So there is not enough, meaning like, I'm not going to introduce you to X, Y, and Z. I'm not going to partner up with you because competition, we all can't be on the top, right? But most people are coming from a place of this lack. There is not enough. Therefore, I can't stop. I can't stop because there's not enough room for me. And so what do? Then we work to our bones. We don't recognize, people are asking, hey, how can I support? Or, what are some challenges that you're navigating through? Or how are you really doing? And we can't answer that because for fear of judgment, for fear of that, they'll find out who we are. There's a lot of this imposter syndrome, especially with the CXO journey, especially with entrepreneurs. We are a lot of times trying to prove to someone. There's a chip on our shoulder. There's a chapter in the book called Chip on Your Shoulder. I used to have it as well, thinking that, oh, well, people are going to think I'm broken because I lost my parents when I was young. And, oh, bichara, like, oh, like, oh, poor her, right?
Pity.
That was
Yeah.
just in my head. And maybe it wasn't true, but it was the story that I was making meaning of in my head. And a lot of times we have these stories that we make meaning of because maybe a teacher said something to us when we were young, oh, you'll never be that, or maybe a sibling said something to us, an aunt said something to us, oh, she'll never make it. Why are you even bothering? But we then plant those seeds and they become either the chips on our shoulder that we're working so hard to prove wrong, that we've got it and we work so hard. Some people work so hard for their whole lives until, something happens, a big fall, but their fall looks like a medical diagnosis. Their fall looks like cancer. Their fall looks like maybe losing a best friend or somebody having a mental breakdown because they seriously, and I've seen it so much in the last few years, their breakdown turns into a burnout because they never, ever, ever, followed these signs of, ooh, what's that? What's that feeling telling me? It's kind of like when you think of, a boiling hot pot of chai, right? We put chai on the stove and, we make the milk, we do the ginger. Chai is my favorite thing to make. It's like my spiritual practice in the mornings now that I have two kids. But so you think about it, you have the chai, it's boiling hot, and it's right before it bubbles up to the surface. So right when that milk, whatever milk you're choosing, bubbles up to the surface, it's boiling hot. So that if you're going to put your hand in that, it's probably going to burn your skin off, basically. So imagine having and walking around with feelings of jealousy, feelings of I'm not good enough, feelings of fuck, I'm not there, I still have to keep going. I don't know if I'm going to make it, feelings of overwhelm, of stress, of anxiety, of frustration, of anger. Yet we are burying it and we're picking up our phones and we're swiping to get that dopamine hit, to ignore the signs of the boiling chai. And we're ignoring the signs of the boiling chai to move the pot to a different stove, to move the pot so it's not going to burn our hand, where we're basically putting our hand in the chai and letting our hand burn, because pain is a signal. That pain is a signal. And most of us do not want to sit in that discomfort of feeling the stress, the overwhelm, to actually ask, what is what are those feelings actually telling me? Those are red flag signs that I need to take some time for myself. I need to reflect what is actually happening right now. They talk about Warren Buffett, who he he actually blocks time in his days, hours and hours, just for self-reflection. He's not as busy as everybody says he is, because he blocks out time for critical thinking, for self-reflection, for, in the book I talk about your personal observation check-in, to see what's in alignment, what's off. How am I really feeling about this? Or am I doing it because society's telling me to do it? Am I doing it because it's the logical next step? Am I doing this because, well, my parents want the best for me, and because they know better, I'm going to do it? I mean, which is probably not everyone listening to this, but it still sometimes seeps into our thinking, right? So are you going to take your hand off the chai pot, turn the heat off, and actually see, oh, okay, how am I going to integrate these feelings of lack, which is the underbelly of anxiety and stress and overworking, right? There's usually always an underbelly of, what emotion does that really mean? Does it mean that I'm not enough? I'm not worthy? Why am I working so hard? Why am I working 18 hours a day, and I'm ignoring my chest pain? I'm ignoring my backaches. I'm ignoring, now I'm getting migraines in my head. It's all connected, right? I mean, I talk about it immensely in terms of what are we, what is this all for, if we're not able to check in weekly? And if you're working, in a company, if you're working with co-founders, or if you're working as an entrepreneur, solopreneur by yourself, are you in a good container around other people where you are open, that you feel safe? A lot of times we're so lonely on the entrepreneurial journey because we don't feel safe in sharing what we really feel. And we're so afraid about what people think and what our families told us, like, nope, we don't talk about our problems to anybody else. No way. They're going to judge you. Or, judging is not even in the vocabulary. It's like, no, 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 you know? And so, what if we can start to reframe that? Turn the stove off.
Absolutely. And something that it reminds me of, Neeta, is the fact that my mom, as a kid, I remember used to say that none of my friends, and she used to say that with great pride, that, none of my friends ever knew about whatever I was going through. And while at that point in time, I grew up to be a person who never used to share, because that is how I was conditioned in a way. And that was the subconscious messaging, that to be a strong person actually means to not share your vulnerabilities, to not share your tough moments. And only to later, when I did a lot of inner work and realized that that's that's not something that makes you human enough. That's, to be strong is not about, courage is not about uh, putting on that facade and always saying that, yeah, all's well, and not sharing it with the world. But courage is about being vulnerable, and something that Brené Brown often talks about. um, Tell me about this. You talked about one fear, which is the fear that arises out of lack. What are the other two fears that also drive CXOs to live this lonely life and live this journey of toughness that they often portray, to be strong and to lead companies? What are the other two fears?
Yeah, so there the three fear cultures that I talk about actually in both of the books. In my first book, Emotional Grit, as well as in That Sucked, Now What. So you have the fear of aversion, right? That I am there, I'm not enough. So I'm not enough. Therefore, I'm going to work relentlessly to prove somebody wrong,
Yeah.
to prove that somebody is going to validate me, basically. That I'm going to. There's actually another graphic amazing graphics in the book. And there's researchers that actually talk about it, and I'll get to this in a second, but the external locus of control versus the internal locus of control. And so researchers have done a lot of studies on what makes people motivated to do certain things. And the for the majority of us that need and that operate in this fear culture of, okay, I am not worthy. This is like the baseline fear. We're operating from a sense of this external locus of control that we are getting our validation. We need it from everyone else versus you being that inner GPS system for yourself, you being in the driver's seat of your life, you not paying attention to the noise around you. And here's the thing, in order to do that, the other concept that I talk about in my book is your bounce factor. Now, this concept of bounce factor was sparked because a few years after, or it was like the same year that my first book came out, moms from this very prominent area in Silicon Valley. For those of you know where Silicon Valley is, obviously in the Bay Area, where all of the tech, I mean the brightest minds and
The biggest
these
startups.
folks, right? All of the startups, everyone works there. I mean, this is like this is like the magic where everyone is like, blossoming. Well, their high school had 3 suicides that year, their high school. So the moms reached out and they had a copy of my book, and because I was living in the Bay Area at the time, and they said, can you please, speak at our school, at least speak to the parents, because we are so distraught what's happening to, our kids. Can you build grit and resiliency without going through the tough things that you've gone through in your life? And I said, absolutely. But I became so obsessed with then thinking, well, why is it that this kind of community is suffering all these challenges? Is it something in their upbringing? Is it something that they are not doing or they're overdoing for their children? For these kids to have so much pressure and not the safety to say, hey, I'm going through something really tough right now. Instead, they're taking their own lives. So I became obsessed with understanding how I can help this particular group. And it was these moms. And, it was before me even having children, but it was 3 kids in that same school year that took their lives. So, was it bullying? Was it the fact that their parents were, helicopter parents trying to solve everything for them? So what I found was, just reading so many different works and doing the research and, compiling on the research from what I did in my very first book, there's something now that I talk about that's called the bounce factor. And you can actually build your own resiliency. You don't have to go through certain crazy adverse moments, but there's 4 parts to it. So for anybody that is going through that, thinks they need to wear the facade of, being, not good enough, this is the one thing that I want you to take away. It's how can you increase your bounce factor? And your bounce factor is comprised by 4 parts. 4 parts. We have to look at your upbringing. Okay, that's number 1. Number 2, we have to look at your ability to be in good stress. And what do I mean by good stress? I mean your current environment. Who are you with? Are you challenging yourself? Are you complacent? Are you with friends that are going to bring you down? Are you with a community that's going to challenge you, like listening to this, CXO Talks, that's going to open your mind and recreate new neural pathways, new neural brain waves to open yourself to new ideas and new ways of thinking, new perspective? Okay, number 3 is your emotional capacity. It's everything that I talk about in this book. What are you feeling? What are you not feeling? What are you ignoring, suppressing, hiding, shameful to talk about? And what are you open and sharing? And how can you lean into stretching yourself to feel those discomforting feelings? And I actually even take you through a full emotional release process of how to release and let go hurts and pains and stressors of the day. And then finally, what's your RAS? Your RAS is your radical self awareness. Your radical self awareness to understand, okay, am I doing this because of somebody else, or am I doing this because of me? Do I have, an external locus of control, or is there an internal locus of control? Am
Mm-hmm.
I in a victim spiral of like, why is this happening to me right now? Or am I thinking, all right, how is this going to be good for the company? How is this going to be good for the next 5 years, 10 years? What can I learn from it? And what I mean by saying that sucked, now what? I mean
Yeah.
that there is a place between that sucked of saying, fuck, that really sucked that you're going through that. I'm so sorry that you're going through this tough time right now. I'm
Yeah.
so sorry that you're going through, this thing that you're feeling stuck, or you're feeling like you can't move forward, or whatever it is. It's okay to feel that
Yeah.
before going into the now what part, because most of us high achievers will just immediately go to now what. We're like, okay, now what, what's the next, which is great. That was my coping mechanism too. But there is the beauty in between that suck, the victim, now what, the victor. And in that, there's the vulnerability that we a lot of times are missing. The idea that, you know what, I'm actually not feeling good right now. I haven't been for the last week. I'm actually going through some challenging things. And yeah, I do need support. And you'll be so surprised how many people will say, how can I support you? Tell me what you
Yeah.
need. Tell me, tell me right now. I'll go. And I guarantee you, you'll probably say that to that person. But the only way we can build it is if we go first. If we
Yeah.
say, yeah, I mean, yesterday was a really tough day for me. I'm over it now, but like I needed to take that time. Thank you so much for allowing me that mental health break. We have these mental health days. And so, in the bounce factor, the 4 parts, the hardest part to reconcile, and for a lot of people who don't necessarily realize this, is the upbringing, because we don't necessarily think, well, how does our upbringing really shift and change what we're exposed to? Well,
Mm-hmm.
when we're young, we may have had helicopter parents who are, calling the teachers, at least for that community, like, hey, can you move this assignment next week? Can you do this? Can you do that?
Yeah.
And or perhaps maybe, they had broken homes where, one, the parents are divorced and had
Yeah.
to go from one area to another that wasn't reconciled, or they've had some major loss or trauma, big T or little t trauma that wasn't reconciled. Or maybe in your home, subconsciously, the guys were treated differently than the girls. I know
Then
that was
girls.
the
Yeah.
case in my house growing up.
A lot of
Were
South
you?
Asian
Yeah, in the
families. Yeah.
diaspora, of course, you're gonna have differences the way women are treated versus men. So, did that mean that the women had to work harder to earn a particular
Mm-hmm.
amount of respect or trust? Did the guys have it easier? Could they go out with their friends easily? So the guys had more of a privilege growing up, right? And so, there's a way to really assess your privilege and to not be ashamed by it, but to say, hey, I have this
Mm-hmm.
privilege, but I'm working towards understanding, having more empathy with people who don't necessarily share my same walk of life. And I think that is the beauty in increasing your bounce factor, your ability to bounce when tough times happen, your ability to
Yeah.
bounce, not break, and your ability to say, oh, okay, well, yeah, I'm coming from this place of fear right now. I'm coming from this place of lack because I was always told when I was growing up that, my teachers growing up said I would never amount to anything, or my uncle always called me stupid, or compared me to, his son, or compared me to somebody else, which we know that happens a lot. And they're doing the best that they can. So this is not to say to, shit on our elders or
Mm-hmm.
people who have been caretaking us. They only were doing the best that they could. Yet we have the ability to now heal that. We can start healing that, and we can say, okay, what does this mean for me? How can I take personal responsibility in saying, all right, I get this now. I get why I'm doing what I'm doing. And when those triggers come up, When somebody says no to partnering with me or working with me or rejecting an offer or whatever, I am going to see how I'm relating to this person. Because
Mm-hmm.
again, this is how we're doing life in relationship, whether it's business, whether it's colleagues, whether it's personal life.
Uh, Neither you talked about, increasing that bounce factor to be able to move ahead in life. And I loved how you've put the bounce factor for anybody who's listening to this conversation or who's being a part of this conversation, wherever you're consuming this. The four things, Neeta, that you talked about, whether it was looking at where you are coming from when it comes to your upbringing, talked about good stress and talked about emotions, talked about radical awareness of self. And I loved how you very beautifully put across the way to actually move from being a victim to a victor is actually to just be vulnerable. That bridge is what I could envision. And something that also came to me while we were talking about all of this is how actually, while you're focusing, when your locus of control is inner, you're actually becoming more compassionate, not to the world, but to yourself. And I would love for you to share your experience and thoughts on how, as a leader, as a CXO, developing compassion can actually help not only yourself, but your environment and the people that surround you.
Oh, it's so good. It's such a great question. I think that so much we're so worried about the external many times. And so we're so worried about, oh, I'm not in this place where I should be. I'm not where I should be here. Or, then you get into the comparison thing and then you get into what am I not doing? Well, let's celebrate what you are doing. Let's just celebrate. In there's a for those of you who do get the book at thatsucknowwhat.com, you actually get the free 40-page journal. I actually have it right
Wow.
here. So this is the free 40-page journal. And what it is, it's basically a self-healing toolbox. And one of the questions that I have in the very beginning is, a lot of times we're so on the go that we don't even take a moment to honor ourselves, and no one else is going to do it for us, okay, as well as we are. So we this is a lesson in self-compassion where we can, and if this is very simple, but for those of you listening, you can just even close your eyes right now just for a second. We're going to do this very quickly, but I have tons of these more in the journal. But just put your hand over your heart and take a moment to just feel and notice, if at all, notice what feels maybe off, what feels like you've been neglecting it. Perhaps maybe that your left toe is in pain, or your right toe is feeling a little bit more out of sync, or maybe that you've been sitting for a long time, so you're feeling your right shoulder more than your left shoulder. But when you put your hand over your heart for just do it for two more seconds, what you're doing is you're acknowledging you. That's what you're doing. You're acknowledging you even in the busyness and the craziness and all of the ruckus in the day, for a reset, to remind yourself, okay, I got this. I'm actually the only one that matters. My opinion is the only one that matters. And I have a journal exercise along with this heart exercise, because when we put our hands over our heart, we're recentering ourselves. We're remembering that, okay, I can go inward right now. When somebody is demanding something from us, because everyone is demanding something. When you check your email, you're getting demands. When you're checking your phone, you're getting demands. When you're checking when you check whatever the papers that come on your desk, the requests that come on your desk, you're checking demands. What about you? This is just a quick check-in. Take your right hand, take your left hand, put it over your heart and say, just a breath, and just say, okay, I got this. What do I need from me right now? And the easiest thing to say is, all right, I got this. And you've got this, and you've come a long way. And it could even be appreciating simple things. It might sound so silly, but to say, wow, I appreciate my legs that have carried me to doing what I'm doing. I appreciate the back that has allowed me to sit for days and days on this very, uncomfortable chair, but to support me upright so that I can write these emails, I can write this book, I can present to people. I thank my back for supporting me to be upright, to write all of these emails, to write this newsletter, to write this book, that it's carried me for this amount of time. I think it's so important to acknowledge ourselves. And you probably noticed when you put your hand over your heart, you're actually feeling you.
Yeah.
And most of us don't even take the time to really honor ourselves. If you put both of your hands over your heart, it's just that signal. And a lot of times it's signaling our brain to activate our rest and digest. It's kind of like saying, okay, before you react, before you fight, flight, freeze, the primal brain in us
Yeah.
that goes into fight mode of like, okay, cortisol's running high, I have to run after something. The fear brain of us that has to say, what's next? What's next? What fires I have to put out? No, you're saying, I got you.
Yeah.
You can take a moment and you can say, thank you. Thank you for doing what you're doing right now, even when you're so tired, even when you're so exhausted, that you got this. It's a very simple practice. It's tuning back into ourselves and really being grateful for and it takes one moment, and I think for so many of us who are trying to do such incredible work in the world, and what we've seen in the last few years, people, I know a lot of us have lost loved ones, during the pandemic. This is one way of saying, I got you. You do not have to fear what's coming up, and to honor yourself. That is cultivating the muscle of compassion. And if we're judging ourselves for it, let's journal about that. Why are we judging ourselves? What are we so afraid of in acknowledging how far we've come? And I have a whole bunch of these small exercises like this to start building the muscle of self-compassion.
And that moment when you got me and everybody who will be listening to us to do this exercise with my hand on my heart, it was such a wholesome and fulfilling moment at that point in time. It was almost like giving myself that um, hugging love of energy, um, and telling myself that, come what may, I'm there and it's all right. Everything is just as it is supposed to be. And thank you for giving us that moment, Neeta. And I do know that you have a hard stop, but before we come to the conclusion of this phenomenal conversation that we've been having, of course, to all the people who will be watching us and listening to this show and this episode, uh, just be assured that the link to that suck now what will be there in the description for you to actually go and get that workbook and put your thoughts out there. Go through those exercises, go through those moments of self reflection. And I promise the way I felt wholesome, you will too. So thank you for doing that, Neeta.
Oh, you're so welcome. I mean, I do have another gift for your audience. It's totally free. You obviously know where to get the book. But if any of you are struggling in mastering and managing your emotions and want to learn just the basics of emotional mastery, you can just go to globalgrit.co/EG guidebook. It's a free workbook that goes into the basics of how to master your emotions, what is coming up, what are some of these building blocks, and it goes through my grit approach: grow, reveal, innovate, and transform, to help you start to do those lessons in your life. So globalgrit.co/EG guidebook.
that will again be there in the resources. Neeta, one thing that I want to know, of course, you mentioned about journaling. Something that I definitely want to know and that I have been actually collecting from all the CXOs that I've been speaking to is, what is that ritual that you follow day in, day out, that keeps you going, that keeps you in grit, that keeps you resilient? Tell me about that.
Oh, well, as a mama of two small little ones under the age of 5, they're 1 and 3. Actually, he just turned 4 last week. So I used to have this very long practice. I think Sonia knows before, 60 to 90 minutes of self care. And, it's just not reasonable for a lot of folks who are so busy, and a lot of times then we fall back on our rituals for ourselves. So I've just made it super simple, super easy. If you can move every day, great. Some days I'm able to move, and some days I move with my kids, and I make it a fun practice. We put one song on, and it can be whatever, but movement is key, and it could be like 5 minutes. And sometimes I don't have that much time, or whatever, somebody's screaming and crying in the morning, and it's just one of those things. But the idea is to create an intentional practice of what is sacred. So for me, morning movement is sacred. I already shared with you my chai is sacred. And it's the intention of what is sacred to you. There are days where we know we'll have our incense sticks and we'll just kind of bless the whole house, and we do it with the family. It's a fun ritual that we'll do, and it takes like 2 minutes, but the kids can get involved and they feel like they're doing something. And then it just, it lightens the house, and of course it has these, all of the ritual aspects of it, but it's starting our day off. Movement, one song, we're all dancing, and it's fun. It gets the energy up. I can stretch a little bit if I have the time. But to turn anything into a ritual means that you're actually intentional about everything. And this is the way that I even make my chai in the morning. Sometimes that's the only time that I get for myself. Sure, you have the meditation. Sure, you can do the breath work. Sure. But I'm saying the one or two things for me, it's movement and it's my chai. And you're probably like, Neeta, how is that your self-care routine? Well, here, I'll tell you why. Because for me, that chai, that sacred way of me, chopping up the ginger, chopping up the cardamom, chopping up my rose petals. Sometimes I change it depending on what I do. I add my collagen protein in it, but this is all intentional. When it goes into the
Mm.
water, it's almost like literally a meditation practice for me
Yeah.
for 10 minutes. And my husband knows, don't touch Neeta's chai. Like, no one can touch it. Even my son, like Ari, tries to do it. And we're like, nope, this is Neeta's. She's going to make it. She's going to make it for everybody. But that is my intentional practice, and it has become a spiritual practice. It's my way of connecting back to myself first thing in the morning after having my lemon water, because I know that that's going to hydrate me and that's going to start me off for the day. So don't beat yourself up if you do not
Yeah.
have the 10 or 20 minutes or the 30 minutes to do this long out meditation. Create your practices in what you really love doing. And I think that's the best advice. I started giving this advice to busy entrepreneurial moms because everyone's like, what the fuck? I don't have an hour to do this. Some days I don't even know. And then you beat yourself up. Again, self-compassion.
Mm.
So have that compassion for yourself. Turn those things into the rituals that you can commit to. I commit to my chai because when I'm savoring my chai, I mean, it is what's giving me life force because of all the love that I'm putting in it, and of the sacred way that I create it. The Japanese, they have a not a chai ceremony, but they have a tea ceremony. And the idea of a tea ceremony is you're literally pouring the tea and you're cleansing the tea, and you're pouring it in a cup, and you're pouring it back, and you're pouring it again, and you're pouring it back. It's the same concept. You're present in the moment, and each of those moments are so sacred because of the energy that you're exchanging and the love that you're pouring into this practice to uplevel yourself, to nourish yourself, to savor that moment. And that is the beauty of the ritual, because if that gives you life, then do more of that.
Absolutely. And, we have this shared love for chai. And for me, also, my morning chai. I make it myself. I make the masala like really fresh and right there. And that's my moment too. And I totally relate to this. But yes, to everyone their own. And you've shared some beautiful rituals, whether it is movement, if it I think for everybody, right? It's the time that you can give to yourself, whether it's 5 minutes, whether it is 10 minutes, whatever it is, but being intentional about it. And like you said, being present in that moment. I think that's the essence of whatever ritual that you're trying to build and commit to that. So, Neeta, thank you for sharing that. And I would now want to actually ask you the question that so we have our own CXO ritual, um, the CXO Talks ritual, which is the part where we conclude the show and every episode where we actually get the last CXO to drop a question for the next CXO. So this is inspired by the show that I love listening to, which is The Diary of a CEO by Stephen Bartlett. And this is something that he does in his own way. And I was very inspired by this because I feel that every CXO has a lesson to share. Every CXO has a question to ask that they're curious about. So it was Jigyasa Labru in my last episode of CXO Talks, and she runs something called as Slam Out Loud, doing phenomenal work with underprivileged students. And she has a question. So she's very intentional about impact. What she asked was that, what are you? And she's built a very enduring organization. So the question she has for Unita is that as a CXO, as a leader, while you're building what you're building, the organization that is very enduring to you, and the journey that you're creating, what are you willing to suffer through?
Oof. Wow. I think that I would probably say I wouldn't compromise on my values. And I think that for everyone who's wanting to build something so voracious, so relentless, so unapologetic, we have to be unapologetic in knowing what our values are, because our core values are what's going to be able to carry us through tough storms, tough times, tough, enduring and seeing our stamina go through some of these the wild rides of an adventure called life. But I think the one way that will really get you there is being so clear about what your values are and figuring out what those values that you stand for are.
Yeah. And stand through them come what may. So that's
Mm-hmm.
where you might also suffer, but that's really powerful, Nita. And thank you for sharing that. Now, of course, I want you to leave a question for the next CXO. So what is your question that you would like to pass on
Mm,
to the next CXO?
yes. So let me tune in. So when you were younger, what were you told your superpower was? And how is that for you in this stage and season of life?
Wow. And like I say in every episode, that every question that comes through from one CXO is also a question that makes me reflect on that, and makes me go through my own inner journey in that moment. So thank you for sharing this question that, what is it that you in your childhood was told is your superpower? Wow. And I'm going to pass that question on to the next CXO. And thank you, Neeta, for being here on CXO Talks in this episode. And I really, really, really can't wait to get my hands on your upcoming book. That
Mm.
sucked now what? Because I
Yes.
think that's going to be a book that is going to literally drive so much compassion and clarity to so many leaders, so many CXOs. And we're going to share the workbook, we're going to share the resources that you have shared in this conversation. And thank you again. I am super grateful and really humbled to have had you in this episode and have had this conversation with you today, Neeta.
Oh, it was such a pleasure, love. So excited. And uh, I'm so glad to pour into your community.
Thank you so much. And it's going to be a fabulous time listening back from our community as to what did they like about this episode. And I'm sure they'll be getting back with a lot of love for you. And I'm sure, like me, they can't wait to get back to you with what they felt after reading the book.
Totally. Totally. Thank you so much for having me. It was so amazing.
Thank you, Neeta.